What if the ugliest thing in your house, the pudgy little china child on the shelf that you have quietly wanted to get rid of for 20 years, is worth more than the display cabinet it is standing in? 10 of these unloved figurines have sold for hundreds, several for thousands, and one of them is the single most collected name in the business, while most examples are worth about the price of a takeaway. Let's find out whether it is on your shelf right now. Here's the truth almost nobody tells you. In this whole category, the front of the piece is decoration, and the base is the document. Two figurines can be identical in every visible respect, painted by the same hand from the same mold, and be separated by a factor of 20 because of a small symbol stamped underneath that took a second to apply and that nobody has looked at since 1960. And nobody ever taught you to look for that. You were taught that these were ornaments, so you looked at them the way you look at ornaments, which is from the front and from a distance. Now let me be honest with you, the way somebody who buys whole houses has to be. Your figurine is almost certainly not one of the record breakers. A rare Toby jug from the Great English House sold recently for over $30,000, and that is a genuine number. But it is a number attached to a variant that most dealers will never handle in a career. I am not going to pretend your shelf holds one, but the distance between a $5 figurine and a $1,500 figurine is much shorter than people think, and almost all of it is settled on the underside. Tonight, without leaving the house. Number 10. The big-eyed children with the teardrop faces. Pastel porcelain children with oversized eyes and inscriptions about friendship, produced in enormous quantities from the late 1970s onward and given as gifts at every occasion for 2 decades. Here is the honest picture, and I would rather tell you than sell you a fantasy. These were made to be collected, in vast numbers, by people who kept them carefully in their boxes. That combination is fatal to value. The ordinary ones change hands for a few dollars, and a great many are worth less than the postage to send them. A small number of early pieces, limited editions, and factory errors do carry real money. Here is your test tonight. Look underneath for a year and a small symbol, and check whether you still have the box and the paperwork. With this maker specifically, the box is a meaningful part of what little value there is. And the loss I see most often is the opposite of the usual one. Somebody spends real money insuring a shelf of these on the assumption that a collectible is an investment, when almost nothing made deliberately for collectors ever appreciates. Number 9. The tall, pale, elongated Spanish pieces. Slender figures with long necks and downcast faces, often in soft blue and gray, usually a girl with a goose or a couple dancing. They have gone thoroughly out of fashion, which is exactly why they are worth a second look. The Spanish house that makes these has produced both a glossy and a matte finish, and it retires designs permanently. A retired sculpture, particularly a large or complicated one, sits far above the common ones, while the small, everyday pieces are worth modest money in the current market. Here is your test tonight. Turn it over and look for an impressed or printed mark. Then check whether the finish is glossy or matte, because collectors treat those as different objects. Then measure it. Size drives price in this maker more than almost anything else, and the big, multi-figure sculptures are where the money sits. Number 8. The tiny animals that came free in the tea. Miniature china animals about an inch high, given away in boxes of tea and in Christmas crackers, produced by the million in England from the 50s onward. Nobody thinks of these as anything. Individually, they are worth very little, and I will not inflate that. What changes the picture is completeness and the rarer sets. Certain series were produced briefly or given away regionally, and a complete set of one of those, particularly with the original packaging, is a genuinely collectible object rather than a bit of clutter. Here is your test tonight. Line them up and photograph them together. Then identify which series each one belongs to before you decide anything. A single one is a curiosity. 14 of the same series with the box is a different conversation. Number 7. The china dogs on the mantelpiece. Matching pairs of spaniels with painted faces and gold chains staring out at the room. Reproductions of these have been sold in gift shops for 50 years, so most people assume theirs are decorative and modern. The genuine 19th century pairs are a real collecting field, and the tell is in how they were made, rather than how they look. Original pairs were press-molded, so the interior is hollow and irregular, with visible finger marks and seams. Later reproductions were slip-cast, which leaves a smooth, even interior and a small circular vent hole. Here is your test tonight. Pick one up and look inside the base with a torch. A rough, uneven interior with fingerprints in the clay is a very good sign. A perfectly smooth inside with a neat, drilled-looking hole means a modern piece. And check that the pair actually match, because two singles put together later are worth far less than a true pair. The loss I see most often with these is a pair getting split between two grandchildren. Separated, the two halves together bring a fraction of what the pair would have. Number 6. The heavily flowered Italian pieces. Ornate porcelain with applied flowers, lace effects, and a great deal of gilding, usually a courting couple or a basket of blossom. Frequently described as fussy, and frequently the first thing out of the door when a house gets cleared. The quality range in this category is enormous, and that is the whole point. Some are workshop pieces of real skill, and some are tourist production, and they can look similar to an untrained eye at 3 feet. Here is your test tonight. Look at the applied flowers under a good light. Individually modeled petals with slightly irregular edges are handwork. Uniform, identical, slightly soft petals came from a mold. Then look underneath for a crowned mark, and be aware that this particular mark has been imitated more than almost any other in ceramics, so treat it as a starting point rather than proof. Number 5. The rabbits. Small figures of rabbits in clothes, made in Lancashire from the middle of the last century, with a distinctive stony finish rather than a glossy one. If you have a family of them on a windowsill, you probably regard them as sentimental clutter. Certain models were made for only a short period before being retired, and those command far more than the familiar ones. The pieces with unusual color variations, and the early models with the original paint intact, are the ones the collectors chase. Here is your test tonight. Check the base for the maker's stamp and the model name. Then look closely at the paint on the face. These were hand-painted, so no two are quite identical, and heavy wear to the painted features cuts the value hard, even when the piece is otherwise perfect. Before we get to the top 5, there is something worth stopping on, because it explains this entire list. The figurines that turn out to be worth real money are rarely the ones anybody thought were beautiful. They are the pieces that went out of fashion so completely that people stopped buying them, which is precisely what makes the survivors scarce. Meanwhile, the piece bought new as a limited edition investment, kept in its box, is worth roughly what it cost, because tens of thousands of other people did exactly the same thing. What actually decides the number is a short list of signals on the underside. The maker's mark and which version of it, the model number, whether there is a line scored through the mark, whether the piece has been restored. All of those are readable in a minute, and that is why I put together a small guide called Reading the Marks, where I go through the backstamps and the small quality tells that separate a $10 figurine from a $1,000 one. So you can read a piece before somebody across the table reads it for you. It is linked below if you want it, and that is the last you will hear of it. Now, back to the list. Number 4. And this one is not a figurine at all. It is the mark on the base. Nearly every serious ceramics maker changed its backstamp every few years, and almost none of them did it to help you. They did it for trade reasons. The effect, though, is that the mark on the bottom is a date stamp accurate to within a few years, and it is the single most valuable piece of information you own about any piece in your house. The Great English House numbers its figure designs sequentially and has done since 1913. That number tells a collector the exact design and colorway. The earliest numbers, the first 50 or so from between 1913 and about 1930, are the most valuable of all, simply because they are the oldest and the fewest survived. Here is your test tonight. Photograph the base rather than trying to read it in poor light. Write down every letter and number exactly as it appears, including anything that looks like a painter's initial. Then search that string alongside the maker's name and look at completed sales rather than asking prices. The loss I see most often is somebody seeing a familiar logo underneath, deciding they know what they have, and never noticing that the version of the logo is the one that stopped being used 90 years ago. Number 3. The character jugs. Ceramic jugs modeled as a head and shoulders, often a grotesque or comic face, made by the great English potteries from the 1930s onward. To a modern eye, they can be genuinely unattractive, and they have collapsed in fashion over the last 20 years. That collapse is why this is worth your attention. The everyday jugs are cheap now, and I will not pretend otherwise. But rarity in this field is extreme and specific. Prototypes, with drawn designs, and pieces made for a single market can be worth thousands, and one rare Toby variant passed $30,000. Here is your test tonight. Look for a design number and a name on the base, and note the size, because the same character was made in several sizes, and the small ones are frequently the scarce ones. Then look at the handle, because the handle design changed across production runs, and it is one of the fastest ways to spot an early example. Number 2. Damage, restoration, and the scored line. This is the one that quietly costs people the most, and it has nothing to do with which maker you have. Restoration is invisible to the naked eye when it is done well, and it changes the value enormously. So does a fine hairline crack you can only find by ear. And there is one thing more, which almost nobody knows to look for. If there is a scratch, a filed line, or a small drilled hole cut deliberately through the mark on the base, that piece left the factory as a second, a flawed run sold off cheaply, and it is worth noticeably less, however perfect it looks to you. Here is your test tonight. Hold the piece by its top and tap the base gently with a fingernail. A sound piece rings faintly. A cracked one gives a dull thud, and you will hear it clearly. Then, run a fingertip across the mark itself, feeling for a deliberate scratch. And run the same fingertip along any protruding part, a finger, an ear, a flower, because restoration is usually slightly warmer and very slightly softer than the glaze around it. Number 1. And it is almost certainly a name you already know, because it is the most collected figurine name in the world. The German figurines of round-faced children in country clothes, taken from the drawings of a nun. Here is the part that surprises people. Enormous numbers were produced across many decades, and a great many of them are worth modest money today. The market for these has fallen a long way from where it was in the 1980s. Fame is not value. The most recognized name is rarely the valuable object, because the whole world already has one. But here is the turn this entire video has been walking toward. And it is the same lesson as every item tonight. This maker changed its trademark repeatedly, and the mark is a calendar. The earliest, from about 1935 to 1949, is a crown rather than a bee, and pieces carrying that crown mark in perfect condition commonly sell between $1,000 and $5,000. The same model, the identical figure, produced under a later mark can be worth 5 to 20 times less. Not slightly less, a different order of thing entirely. And the bee itself keeps changing after that. It becomes stylized around 1960, and the wording that sits beside it changes as Germany itself changed. Which means the country name printed under the mark is doing dating work as well. So here is your final test, and it is the smallest detail on this list. Turn it over and look for a crown. If what you find is a crown, rather than any form of bee, stop. Put it down carefully and get a proper opinion before it goes anywhere near a table at a yard sale. A crown instead of a bee? That is the difference between a figurine worth $20 and one worth thousands. And it takes 4 seconds to check. Every single item tonight came down to the same habit. Not the face, not the fashion, not whether you like looking at it. The mark, the version of the mark, and how briefly that version was in use. So before you clear a single shelf or let anybody talk you into a box price for the whole cabinet, do this first. Turn it over, read the mark, and believe what it tells you. If this made you want to walk straight to the cabinet and start picking things up, do me one small favor and like the video, because that is what tells me to keep making them. And the next one lives behind the subscribe button, which is this exact treatment for the board games stacked in the closet. Then tell me down in the comments, what is the ugliest thing in your house that you cannot bring yourself to throw out, and who gave it to you? A mother? An aunt? A house you helped clear? I read all of them, and the story of who chose it is half of what it is. One last thing, and I do mean it. Do not clear a single shelf before you have looked at the bottoms. Number 1 is probably in your cabinet right now. Go and turn it over.